In the wide-ranging canon of cinema, non-narrative works are often unfortunately overshadowed by their story-heavy counterparts. As a multifaceted art form, the visual capabilities of film can create otherworldly combinations defined by a concrete style. Hollywood's inclination to prioritize the familiar makes it rather difficult for experimental works to reach mainstream status. The exceptions to this are striking. Maya Deren's Message of the Afternoon, Chris Marker's La Jetée, and Luis Buñuel's Un Chien Andalou have all been touted as excellent gateways into the world of the avant-garde. Experimental cinema can appear daunting or pretentious at first glance to many, but it doesn't only consist of abstract imagery or neglect of traditional cinematic conventions. Long-form experimental films that aim to capture the effects of time are regularly noted for their length above all else, and while something like Andy Warhol's 8-hour-long Empire comes to mind when fulfilling this definition in a very literal sense, directors like James Benning and his minimalist landscape cinema perhaps best captures the ethos of a specific environment. His films are unlike anything else and are always endowed with trademark specificity. Commitment triumphs above all else. Commercial interests are discarded. In the musical world, the ambient genre can be compared to that of its cinematic experimental counterpart. You aren't going to hear ambient tracks being played on the biggest car radio stations, nor is it as popular as other types of music. However, its devotees champion these compositions highly. They provide a transcendent feeling above all else, an understanding of emotion, and a simultaneous glimpse into the comfort and darkness of our wide world. The feelings that arise when listening can be ineffable, drawing us nearer to the plane of spirituality. These sentiments are as personal as they come. Brian Eno, one of the godfathers of ambient music, explains the purpose of its title. Whereas conventional background music is produced by stripping away all sense of doubt and uncertainty, and thus all genuine interest from the music, ambient music retains these qualities. And whereas their intention is to brighten the environment by adding stimulus to it, thus supposedly alleviating the tedium of routine tasks and leveling out the natural ups and downs of the body rhythms, ambient music is intended to induce calm and a space to think. Ambient music must be able to accommodate many levels of listening attention without enforcing one in particular. It must be as ignorable as it is interesting. Singularity is abundant throughout experimental work. This aspect functions in the same vein as the aforementioned. In many cases, only one location is highlighted, one take is used, and time stands still. Godfrey Reggio's Qatsi trilogy depicts our perception of the world on a much grander scale. For example, Koyannis Qatsi is quite minimal in its structuring. The visuals simply change in conjunction with Philip Glass's score. However, the pace and editing of the music mirrors the rapid industrialization of the modern world. We become overwhelmed by its pure scale, and before we are able to soak in a moment, another arrives. Minimalism and ambient cannot be considered interchangeable terms in any sense, but they can draw influence from one another. At ambient cinema's purest form, the one strong division between passive and active engagement is struck down, enabling a new headspace, a definitive alternative consciousness to emerge in both visual and musical form. This video will serve as an introduction to the presentation of my personalized ambient cinema canon, a project which I will craft on this channel over time. To begin our journey, we will start with William Basinski's The Disintegration Loops. William Basinski is one of the most renowned composers in the genre, as well as a personal favorite of mine. Although his works aren't as well known compared to the likes of Brian Eno or Aphex Twin, his influence knows no bounds. His prolific output is displayed through the sheer volume of his discography. Working primarily in ambient, dark ambient, drone, tape music, and minimalism, each central tenet from the genres disappears and reappears with the constantly evolving state of his work. As a trained clarinetist, Basinski's appreciation for music arose at an early age, leading him to eventually study jazz saxophone and composition at the University of North Texas in the 1970s. By using reel-to-reel decaying tape decks and tape loops, the natural melancholy of the instruments would quickly work in cadence with Basinski's ear for the saudade. Many contemporary ambient composers are influenced by the works of minimalists like Eno and Steve Reich, with the latter falling more heavily under the category. I highly recommend listening to Eno's Ambient series and Reich's Music for 18 Musicians for a brilliant introduction to the style. Basinski's 1998 release, Shortwave Music, is an archival project that features manipulation of shortwave radio frequencies. It contains one of my favorite aspects of Basinski's work, the ability to carve any sound, no matter how confrontational, into a captivating listening experience. The water music duology reverses the tone, taking you on a gentle drift beneath a wave of comfort. The shift between these two projects represents how multifaceted his skill set is. Discography-wise, there's not a single emotion that is left untouched. Starting in the 1980s, Basinski began to record from found sound sources, a choice that would lead him to make an astounding yet insightful discovery decades later. This stemmed from his decision to record on magnetic tape, an invention coined in 1928 by German engineer Fritz Flümer. By placing metal strips on cigarette papers, Flümer realized that the metal could serve as a substitute for wire recording. Radio shows can now be kept for replay, thereby changing the broadcasting world. Despite its obvious advantages at the time, the tape itself was found to be susceptible to disintegration, rendering any recording after a few decades to be irreversibly altered. His bold experimentation would pay off. Basinski found his initial tape loop recordings 2 decades later and noticed they began to deteriorate upon attempting to transfer them to a digital format, creating a cycle of endless decay. When played on a reel-to-reel tape recorder, the loop would never end, with each passage of the tape's head marking the permanent state of transition a step further. Tests conducted on similar tapes only reaffirmed his hypothesis. The final step in completing the process coincided with the introduction of spatializing reverb, making each note increasingly more resonant. The digitization was complete and the project seemed to finally come to a close, but it didn't. On September 11, 2001, Basinski sat atop the roof of his Brooklyn apartment while the World Trade Center collapsed. As the day made way for the night, he captured the changing skyscape on camera, forever memorializing the moment. The next day, he played Disintegration Loop 1.1, the first 63-minute-long track of the work over the footage, resulting in the completion of the film. While the complete anthology of the Disintegration Loops lasts several hours, the film's footage only matches the length of the first track, chronicling the sunset as the smoke and sky merge into one. The shot is haunting to the core. A once thriving city is marred by the persistence of an artificial haze, polluting the city literally and metaphorically. Clouds are nowhere to be seen. The clear sky is further obstructed by the continuing onslaught. Each of the 4 separate album covers' art is directly taken from 4 different frames within the 63 minutes, all of which seem like they could have been captured on separate days, serving also as a guiding transition for the stages of decay. A slow and steady pulsating wall of sound begins to take root, every note familiarizing itself with us. The angelic hum calls out, its gentle rhythm beckons us to immerse ourselves into this veil of growing darkness. The subtle faraway sounds in the back, for me, are so effective due to their all-pervasive nature, filling in the gaps in the background of our minds. As we continue to hear the repetition, our analytical brains search for any difference to cling to, and by the time we expect a change to occur, it does, but only ever so slightly. In the 30th minute, a lone plane streaks across the horizon. Its lights flicker sporadically. This is the only time we will see it, and it is the only time they will see the horror from above. We can only imagine the perspectives of those on board, having witnessed something no one else ever will. By this point, the variation in the composition is impossible to ignore. The gaps are sustained, but never fully silent. Time and its connection to life and death are represented by the music and the landscape, unknowingly binding themselves in the process. As the tape begins to decay physically, our knowledge of its remnants grows stronger. An inherently paradoxical relationship is formed by this, since each of the previous sequence of notes is rendered obsolete due to the passage of time. Basinski doesn't try to pass off the work as something solely made by his creative process, something I feel can be easily misinterpreted. He never meant to keep those tapes in isolation in order to experiment, he merely attempted to preserve them. The recording wasn't made for the work. At its core, it is a piece of cinema verite, rooted in an undeniable truth. We never know what awaits us tomorrow. It's because of this that I believe the film isn't trying to put out a profound message or present itself as a piece of art with a set meaning. It exists out of respect for the victims of an unspeakable tragedy, and also serves as a time capsule for all those who witnessed that day. It encourages us to empathize with our deepest human instincts beyond all else, to reflect on life and our intertwined journeys. Solid transforms into gas, and all that was there will soon decay. The sky finally fades from blue to black, the smoke now indistinguishable from the sky. Simply put, Disintegration Loop 1.1 is an elegy for all those who have experienced loss. It carries a grief so great, one of monumental proportions, demonstrating time's capacity for destruction, a universal human trial. But all things must pass. The smoke is temporary, the night is healing. Among the scattered ashes, a new day arrives. The Disintegration Loops is one of the most moving pieces of art I've ever encountered in my lifetime. I highly encourage you to experience and fully feel both the complete composition and film. Thank you for watching, I truly appreciate it.